Most people do not fail because they lack potential. They fail because they have never built a personal philosophy strong enough to direct their behavior. They have goals, they have ambition, they have moments of emotional intensity, but they do not have a stable thinking system that keeps them aligned when the emotion fades, and when philosophy is unclear, everything else becomes unstable. Attitude shifts with circumstances. Discipline depends on mood. Action becomes reactive instead of intentional. As a result, outcomes remain inconsistent. If you look back over the last few years of your life, you may recognize a pattern. There were moments when you decided things would change. You made promises to yourself. You began new routines, new plans, new directions. And yet gradually you return to familiar patterns. Not because you are incapable, not because you are unintelligent, but because the philosophy governing your life remained unchanged. You were still operating from an internal system that tolerates mediocrity, that allows delay, that negotiates standards when pressure increases. When the philosophy beneath your behavior does not shift, any external action will be temporary. This is rarely stated clearly. You do not lack motivation, you lack structural clarity. You do not lack opportunity, you lack personal standards. You do not lack ability. You lack an internal contract strong enough to enforce consistent action. Most people attempt to fix results. They want higher income, better health, greater influence, more freedom. But they rarely address the foundational layer, personal philosophy. Personal philosophy is how you interpret the world. It is what you believe is acceptable. It is the standard you set for your own conduct. It is the boundary between what you will tolerate and what you will not. That philosophy shapes your attitude. Your attitude determines your level of action. Your actions produce your results, and your results ultimately construct your lifestyle. If your current lifestyle does not satisfy you, the issue is not the surface objective. The issue is the governing philosophy underneath it. There are moments in a person's life when a quiet dissatisfaction emerges, a subtle internal rejection of the current version of self, a recognition that continuing in the same direction is no longer acceptable. Yet instead of rebuilding philosophy, most people chase another surge of motivation, and motivation can never replace structure. You can listen to a powerful speech, you can read a meaningful book, you can feel inspired for a short period of time, but without a defined system that reorganizes how you think and operate, you will drift back to your previous baseline. The reality is this: your life is not determined by emotional peaks. It is determined by the philosophy you repeatedly apply every day. If you want to alter the trajectory of your life, you do not need more intensity. You need a reconstructed foundation. This is not about excitement. It is not about hype. It is about examining the philosophy currently directing your decisions, and if necessary, rebuilding it deliberately, calmly, and with structure. That is where we begin. The real problem is not lack of effort. It is misalignment at the philosophical level. Most people believe their struggle is practical. They think they need better tactics, better tools, better timing. They assume that if they simply adjust their strategy, the outcome will improve. But strategy without philosophical clarity becomes scattered execution. You can work hard and still move in circles if the internal framework guiding your decisions is inconsistent. The deeper issue is that many people have never consciously defined what they stand for. Their beliefs are inherited, not examined. Their standards are influenced by environment, not chosen with intention. Their expectations are shaped by comparison, not by internal conviction. When your philosophy is borrowed, your direction will always feel unstable. You will chase goals that do not truly belong to you. You will measure progress against standards you did not create. And when pressure appears, you will default to comfort rather than commitment because your internal code was never clearly written. A personal philosophy is not a collection of quotes or abstract ideals. It is a decision about what is acceptable in your life and what is not. It is a statement about the kind of person you are willing to become. It answers questions most people avoid. What do I tolerate from myself? What level of effort is non-negotiable? What principles override convenience? Without defined answers to these questions, behavior becomes negotiable. When behavior is negotiable, consistency disappears. And without consistency, results remain unpredictable. Many individuals attempt to compensate for philosophical weakness with bursts of motivation. They rely on external triggers to initiate action, a new year, a new program, a new environment. But external triggers cannot sustain internal direction. If the core belief system remains undefined, motivation will always fade. The real problem is structural. When your philosophy is unclear, you make decisions based on emotion rather than principle. You react instead of respond. You avoid discomfort instead of using it as feedback. You drift instead of direct. Over time, this creates a subtle erosion of self-trust. You begin to doubt your own promises. You hesitate before committing because past commitments dissolved under pressure. And gradually, the issue is no longer performance, it is identity. You start to question whether you are capable of change at all. But the truth is simpler and more precise. It is not that you cannot change. It is that you have not rebuilt the philosophical foundation required to support change. Until you define your personal standards, your behavior will remain inconsistent. Until you clarify your principles, your effort will remain scattered. Until you consciously choose the philosophy that governs your life, you will continue operating on default settings designed by circumstances rather than intention. The problem is not intensity, it is design. And what is poorly designed cannot produce stable results, no matter how strong the temporary effort may be. There is a principle articulated clearly by Jim Rohn that serves as a turning point in understanding personal change. He spoke about 4 emotions that can alter the direction of a life in a single day: disgust, decision, desire, and resolve. At first glance, these appear to be emotional states. But when examined carefully, they are structural triggers in the reconstruction of personal philosophy. Disgust is the moment your current identity becomes unacceptable to you. It is not frustration with circumstances. It is rejection of your own tolerance level. When a person reaches the point of saying, "I have had it," something significant has shifted internally. The old philosophy can no longer justify current results. Disgust is not loud, it is precise. It is the recognition that continuing under the same standards is no longer an option. This is the collapse of a previous belief system. Decision follows. Decision is the formal separation from the old internal code. Many people experience dissatisfaction but never decide. They feel discomfort but do not define a new direction. Decision is not emotional intensity, it is clarity. It is the point where ambiguity ends. Without decision, disgust becomes temporary agitation. With decision, disgust becomes transformation. Desire then becomes the energy behind the new philosophy. Not surface-level excitement, but alignment. Desire emerges when you see a different version of yourself as possible and preferable. It is internal ignition. It does not come from outside validation. It comes from internal vision. When your philosophy begins to shift, desire strengthens because you are no longer negotiating with your former standards. Resolve is the stabilization of that new philosophy. It is the internal contract that removes the exit clause. Resolve says, "I will, not I hope." It is the moment when the new code is protected from compromise. Resolve is not aggression. It is consistency under pressure. These 4 elements are not motivational tools. They are phases in philosophical reconstruction. Disgust dismantles the old framework. Decision establishes separation. Desire fuels movement toward the new standard. Resolve locks the standard in place. The meaning beneath this principle is simple but demanding. Lasting change is not emotional, it is philosophical. Emotions may initiate awareness, but only a redesigned internal code can sustain progress. Jim Rohn emphasized that emotions must translate into action, and action must be structured. Without structure, emotion dissipates. With structure, emotion becomes momentum. This is where many misunderstand the principle. They focus on the feeling, not the framework. But the real significance lies in recognizing that each emotional trigger corresponds to a structural shift in how you define yourself. When you understand this, you stop chasing intensity and begin building architecture. And architecture, not intensity, determines durability. Most people fail not because they never experience disgust, decision, desire, or even moments of resolve. They fail because they never convert those moments into a structured system. The emotion appears, but it is not anchored. The clarity comes, but it is not formalized. The commitment is spoken, but it is not protected by standards. This is the systemic mistake. They treat transformation as an event instead of an architectural process. When someone reaches the point of saying, "I have had it," there is energy available, but without a redesign of personal philosophy, that energy has no direction. It becomes a short-lived surge. The person reorganizes their schedule for a week, perhaps two. They adjust their behavior temporarily. But because the underlying beliefs remain unchanged, the old patterns quietly reassert themselves. The failure is not emotional weakness, it is structural absence. Another common mistake is confusing affirmation with construction. A person declares, "I will change, I will succeed, I will never return to this state." But affirmation without discipline becomes self-deception. When there is no measurable standard attached to the declaration, the statement floats. It sounds strong, but it has no enforcement mechanism, and eventually the mind adapts to inconsistency. It becomes comfortable with breaking its own word. This erosion of internal credibility is more damaging than any external setback. Many individuals also misunderstand desire. They believe wanting something intensely is sufficient. They pursue stimulation, inspiration, motivational content. But desire without alignment creates contradiction. You say you want growth, but you protect comfort. You say you want financial expansion, but you avoid skill development. You say you want discipline, but you maintain environments that encourage distraction. The issue is not lack of desire, it is lack of integrated philosophy. Without alignment between belief and behavior, desire becomes frustration. Decision is also frequently mishandled. People delay decisive action because they are waiting for certainty. They analyze, compare, reconsider. But indecision is not caution. It is philosophical hesitation. When your internal code is undefined, every option appears equally unstable. So you postpone commitment. And with each postponement, momentum weakens. Over time, this creates a pattern of self-negotiation. You begin to trust your doubts more than your decisions. Resolve suffers the same fate. Many people announce commitment publicly or privately, yet they maintain escape routes. They leave alternatives open. They retain the option to revert. This makes the resolution fragile. Under pressure, the mind will choose the easier route because it was never removed. Resolve without constraint is aspiration, not commitment. The systemic failure can be summarized precisely. Emotion is not converted into principle. Principle is not converted into standards. Standards are not converted into measurable action. And without this progression, the cycle repeats. Temporary clarity, temporary effort, temporary results, followed by regression. Most people are not lacking intensity. They are lacking architecture. They try to improve output without redesigning the internal operating system. They chase outcomes without defining the philosophy that produces those outcomes consistently. Until that sequence is corrected, improvement will always feel unstable. The problem is not that they do not want better results. The problem is that they have not built a structure capable of sustaining them. If lasting change requires architecture, then we need a framework that translates philosophy into consistent results. Not an abstract idea, but a three-level structure that moves from belief to behavior to measurable progress. This is where reconstruction becomes practical. The first level is personal philosophy. This is the foundation. Before you adjust habits, before you build plans, you must define what you believe about yourself and about responsibility. Personal philosophy answers questions that most people avoid because they are uncomfortable. What standard am I unwilling to violate? What kind of person am I committed to becoming? What behaviors are beneath me regardless of circumstance? If these answers are unclear, your actions will always be negotiable. Philosophy is not optimism. It is definition. It is a conscious decision about identity. For example, you can decide that you are a person who does what he commits to, even when motivation fades. That belief, if accepted fully, changes the interpretation of discomfort. Fatigue no longer becomes an excuse. It becomes a test of identity. When philosophy is defined at this level, your self-image shifts from reactive to deliberate. You stop asking how you feel and start asking what your standard requires. Without this clarity, habits collapse under pressure because they are not anchored to principle. The second level is standards and habits. Once philosophy is defined, it must be translated into behavioral expectations. Standards are the daily expression of belief. If your philosophy states that you value growth, then your standard may include daily learning or skill development. If your philosophy states that you value physical discipline, then your standard may include a non-negotiable training schedule. Standards remove ambiguity. They specify what is acceptable and what is not. Habits then operationalize those standards. Habits are repeated behaviors that align with your defined philosophy. They are not random routines. They are deliberate reinforcements of identity. The mistake most people make is attempting to build habits without clarifying philosophy. They adopt routines because they appear effective, but when discomfort arises, there is no deeper reason to sustain them. When standards are rooted in philosophy, consistency increases because behavior is no longer optional. It becomes aligned with self-definition. The third level is action plan and measurement. Philosophy and standards are incomplete without feedback. An action plan specifies what will be done, when it will be done, and how progress will be tracked. Measurement converts intention into accountability. If your philosophy includes financial expansion, then your plan may include weekly revenue targets or monthly skill metrics. If your philosophy includes intellectual development, then you may track reading volume or applied learning sessions. Measurement is not about obsession. It is about clarity. What is not measured remains abstract. When results are visible, adjustments become rational rather than emotional. This third level prevents self-deception. It exposes gaps between belief and behavior, and it allows correction before decline becomes permanent. Together, these three levels form a coherent structure. Philosophy defines identity. Standards and habits express that identity daily. Action plans and measurement ensure alignment and adaptation. When one level is missing, instability returns. Without philosophy, habits are fragile. Without standards, philosophy remains theoretical. Without measurement, effort becomes subjective. But when all three operate together, change becomes sustainable because it is structural rather than emotional. This is the framework that transforms temporary clarity into durable progress. Implementation begins where abstraction ends. A framework is only useful if it is translated into deliberate movement. So the question is not whether you understand the three levels. The question is whether you are prepared to apply them with precision. The first step is to formalize your personal philosophy in writing, not in vague language, not in inspirational tone, but in clear, enforceable statements. Write down the standards you refuse to violate. Define what discipline means in your life. Define what responsibility means in your life. Define what mediocrity means and whether you are willing to tolerate it. This document does not need to be long, but it must be specific. When it is written, read it daily for 30 days. This is not affirmation. It is reinforcement of identity. The second step is to translate philosophy into 2 or 3 non-negotiable standards. Do not attempt to redesign your entire life at once. Choose limited areas that produce leverage. For example, define a fixed wake time, a fixed work block, or a fixed training schedule. Keep the number small but absolute. The purpose here is not volume, it is consistency. When standards are few and clear, compliance increases. When they are vague and excessive, they collapse. The third step is to attach measurement to each standard. If you define a daily work block, measure hours completed. If you define a reading standard, measure pages or time spent. If you define a financial target, track weekly progress. Measurement creates feedback. Feedback creates adjustment. Without measurement, you rely on memory and emotion, and both are unreliable. The fourth step is weekly review. Once a week, evaluate alignment between philosophy, standards, and results. Where did you comply? Where did you negotiate? Do not dramatize failure, observe it. If a standard was not met, ask whether the philosophy was unclear or whether the environment was poorly structured. Adjust accordingly. This process builds internal credibility. Each week of honest review strengthens self-trust. Finally, remove unnecessary escape routes. Resolve requires constraint. If distraction undermines your standards, limit access. If environments weaken discipline, redesign them. Do not depend on willpower alone. Structure your surroundings so that compliance becomes easier than deviation. Implementation is not dramatic, it is methodical. It is the quiet repetition of defined behaviors aligned with declared philosophy. Over time, identity stabilizes because actions confirm belief. Results begin to reflect structure rather than mood. And gradually, lifestyle changes not because you chased intensity, but because you engineered alignment. This is how philosophy becomes tangible. Not through emotion, but through disciplined execution, measured consistently and adjusted deliberately. In the end, this is not about intensity. It is not about becoming someone else overnight. It is about becoming structurally consistent with the person you claim you want to be. A rebuilt philosophy does not announce itself loudly. It reveals itself quietly through repetition, through standards that are kept, through actions that are measured, through decisions that are no longer negotiated. Most people search for a breakthrough moment, a surge of clarity that permanently changes their direction. But durable progress rarely comes from a single dramatic shift. It comes from a deliberate redesign of the internal code that governs daily behavior. When your philosophy is defined, your attitude stabilizes. When your attitude stabilizes, your actions become predictable. When your actions become predictable, your results compound. And when results compound, lifestyle changes without forcing it. This is the sequence, not excitement, but alignment, not motivation, but structure. There will be days when emotion is low. There will be periods when progress feels slow. That is not a signal to abandon the system. It is a reminder that philosophy is tested under pressure. If your standards hold during difficulty, your identity strengthens. If they collapse, you do not need shame. You need refinement. Review the framework. Clarify the philosophy. Adjust the standards. Measure again. Continue calmly, deliberately. You are not trying to impress anyone. You are building internal credibility. And that credibility becomes the foundation of confidence. Confidence that is earned through evidence, not declared through words. At some point, you will notice something subtle. You no longer ask whether you feel like acting, you ask what your standard requires. That is the shift. That is when philosophy has moved from concept to control, from intention to governance. If your current results do not reflect the life you want, do not search for stronger emotion. Examine your philosophy. Define it. Translate it into standards. Attach measurement. Review weekly. Protect it with resolve. This is not complicated, but it is demanding, and it is sufficient. The life you experience is the visible expression of the philosophy you practice. Change the philosophy with precision, and the rest will follow. Thank you for listening. I hope this message does not just inform you, but refines you, not in a dramatic way, but in a structural one. If even one idea today causes you to raise your standards slightly, to think more clearly, to act more deliberately, then it has served its purpose. The goal is not to feel motivated for a day. The goal is to become better each day through design, not emotion. If you found this valuable and it helped you think differently about your own structure, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. There is more work to do, and the next conversations will continue building the architecture you need to operate at a higher level.